Now, trade is set to take center stage because now Russian President Vladimir Putin is going to be in India on the 4th and 5th of December. He's going to be here. New Delhi, of course, is expected to address concerns over its trade deficit with Russia. So bilateral trade currently stands at $68 billion. It's skewed in Russia's favor, while the Kremlin is aiming to raise that to $100 billion. But let's see what's at stake over here. And for that, my colleague Rishabh is still standing by. Rishabh, you're tracking what could unfold between India and Russia when Putin comes calling. And we're not far away. 4th and 5th of December is the kind of crucial dates that we've kind of penciled in. Tell us on the trade front, what all is at stake right now between the two countries?
Right, Vikram, the first thing that is there is, of course, the trade deficit, like you said, highly skewed in favor of Russia. So out of the $68 billion, roughly $60 to $64 billion is actually what Russia sells to India. And only about $4 to $5 billion is what India sells to Russia. So that needs to be worked upon. There's a lot of potential there. And also, it's also skewed because India buys a lot of oil from Russia. So that is where this deficit has come in fraud, but there's a lot of potential to sell more and more pharma, agricultural products, processed food products. All of that can be sold to Russia, and that is something that will be discussed during this current visit. Another point when it comes to trade is, of course, a free trade agreement. India is in talks with at least 20 countries at this point in time, and one of the blocks that India is talking to is the Eurasian Economic Council. And Russia is obviously a very key part of it. Apart from Russia, there's also other former Soviet Union states like Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan. But Russia is obviously the largest economy of all of them. And they will have a very pivotal role to play when it comes to a free trade agreement. So we could see progress on the free trade agreement front as well when it comes to Putin's visit. What we're also seeing is that energy supplies, like I said, they will be a very crucial part. You've seen the Russian oil tariffs that have been imposed on India, the additional 25% tariffs. These will, of course, be discussed. We may not hear about them on a formal level, but these will obviously be discussed at a very high level between both the governments. What we're seeing is that a skilled workers mobility pact could also be in talks. This is something that India has worked out with the UK. It is an integral part of various FTAs that is being signed. And this is essentially to generate more and more solid employment opportunities for skilled Indian workers across the world. And that is something that Russia could also invite when we see defense is a major part, but defense pacts are usually not put out, given the fact that these are very sensitive issues. So that is something that we're looking forward to when President Putin visits New Delhi on December 4th and 5th.
Thanks very much for setting the context for this conversation with Jayant Dasgupta, the former Indian ambassador to the World Trade Organization, who's joining us on this show. Mr. Dasgupta, thanks for making the time. You know, this bilateral trade between India and Russia, like we started out saying, stands at $68 billion, which is skewed in Russia's favor. So tell us about the structural reasons behind this kind of imbalance and perhaps how feasible it is for India to correct it through exports, perhaps in pharma, in agriculture, and food products.
At the moment, I think the exports to Russia are about $4.5 billion worth. And of that, there is a substantial portion of petroleum products which Russia buys back after exporting crude oil to India, which is in the region of $65 or $67 billion it was last year. Now, that is going to go down very drastically because from the 21st of November, I think the American sanctions have kicked in. So this year, the trade deficit would be much less. We were suffering a trade deficit of about $60 billion or $62 billion with respect to Russia. Now, we can, of course, increase our exports in the traditional items which we have been exporting to Russia, like pharmaceuticals, like agricultural products, spices, tea, coffee. We also export some amount of electrical machinery and other products, iron and steel. So, and of course, apparel, but all these, only one or two of these products cross the $500 million mark, which is $500 million mark. The rest are all in the 100 million, less than 100 million, $200 million mark.
Yes.
So to push them up and to have, when the Russian exports of oil to India are going to come down very drastically, to push it up to $100 billion, I think, is going to be a very, very tall task indeed.
But
in
what
the next
about,
few years' time.
But what about energy in the mix, Mr. Dasgupta? Because oil supply is very key, and the timing of Putin's visit this time is also a very crucial one. At this time, given US tariffs on Indian purchases of Russian crude, how do you think India is going to navigate those sanctions while we are trying to meet our energy security needs and partially through Russia, but now there are sanctions? So how is that part of the negotiation likely to work out?
I think India will have a very positive attitude, but it will not be able to, evade U.S. sanctions, and especially the public sector, oil refiners, and also private sector. Reliance was one of the first ones to stop buying Russian oil. So what is of the essence, I think, is this 28-point plan of President Trump, which he has given to the Ukrainians. And if the Ukraine-Russia conflict ends within the next 2-3 months, then I think it can again resume and get back to normal. The Russian contribution to the global oil supplies is about 10%, 10 to 12%. And if India stops buying, and of course the Chinese are continuing to buy, but this will be a big dent in the Russian market,
right,
as far as their supplies are concerned. So I think getting back to the 2024 position or the October-September position of 2025,
yes,
that will depend on what happens on the Russia-Ukraine front.
Right. So that's going to be a crucial one to watch out for. But very quickly, if I may ask you, Mr. Dasgupta, like my colleague was pointing out, there is an indication of a potential discussion on skilled worker mobility between India and Russia. How do you think that could, because India's workforce and service exports, are there any precedents to this between the two countries that would really enhance the bilateral trade between the two countries?
I think there is a scope for skilled professionals, similar to the H-1B visa workers whom we sent to the US and the Western European countries. So there is plenty of scope for that. But, that will depend on the globalization of Russian companies, because the Russian software industry, banking industry, these are the main users, fintech industry. These are somewhat, I think, limited in scope as compared to, let's say, the US or Canada or the UK and Germany, etc. So the scope would be there, but somewhat limited as compared to the other Western countries.
Yes, from all practical angles, this trade agreement that is potential between India and Russia, it is pivotal, but equally important are the that remain for the two countries to navigate, tracking the outcome of President Putin's visit very closely. But for the Dasgupta, thank you very much for joining us with your insight here on Profit 360. Appreciate and your insight. And with that, it's going to be a wrap on this edition of Profit 360. Of course, all the news and updates right here on NDTV Profit. But for the moment, from me, Vikram Oza, and the entire team, good evening.